Well, another edition of Persons of Interest to kick off 2020. And my guest this time is one of my favorite follows on Twitter because as being a baseball fan, a sports fan, he covers the game of baseball in a pretty unique way. And I also appreciate the fact that he actually has a vote as it comes to the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. My guest is Ryan Fagan, writer of the Sporting News. Ryan, thanks so much for joining me, man. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Derek, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah. We were talking off air that you actually had a conversation with one of the teachers in the school district where I work, Joel Adam, who was the PE teacher and a longtime Wentzville Holt baseball coach and softball coach, and actually coached some basketball as well, talking about some of the stories about some of those baseball studs that he's had come through. And you've actually, going back into before you got to the Sporting News, actually had the chance to write and cover and talk to Joel on a number of different occasions.
Yeah, my first job out of undergrad was working for the Suburban Journal's papers of St. Charles County. And that's where I cut my teeth. I covered high school sports on every level. I think the first event I ever covered was Duchesne versus Troy softball out at McNair Ballpark. And the final score of that game wound up being like 27-3. And I was thinking, what am I doing with myself here? But, wound up staying there, covered that's when the River City Rascals, the minor league baseball team, the Frontier League team started. So did a lot of the minor league sports, did a lot of high school stuff, and, wound up, back then there was only one Wentzville high school, so we just called it Wentzville, not Holt. But yeah, Joel was there, and, he had, I think Wes Detweiler was there when I was there, Ross's older brother, and then Ross Detweiler obviously came through, Tim Melville. When I got to Sporting News, that was when Tim Melville was coming up and was the high draft pick. I remember doing a feature story on Tim for the Sporting News magazine, which was pretty cool because I kind of got to connect my hometown county to my new job with the national publication. So yeah, there's a lot of deep roots in that St. Charles County area.
That's awesome. I didn't know it went that deep for you, but that's cool to hear. So I know you recently just moved back to the St. Louis area. So welcome back home. Thank you. I guess you mentioned undergrad. Where did you go to college, and where did you sort of find your interest in journalism and being a sports writer?
Well, I grew up in St. Charles. Actually, I went to St. Charles High. Okay. Graduated from there in '94, which seems like a long time ago. But so I grew up. We had the Post's badge, and Rick Hummel was the Cardinals beat writer back then, and I just thought he had the coolest job in the world because he was at the ballpark every day, and I read everything that the paper wrote about the Cardinals. Just devoured it, and that was kind of always in the back of my mind. Yeah, that'd be really, really cool. So I went to undergrad at Southwest Baptist University, which is up in Bolivar, Missouri, about a half hour north of Springfield. Wrote on the little school paper there, although there's nothing that we produced there that I'm super proud of. Let's bury some of that stuff in the archives. That's fine with me. But, and I just always kind of had that in my mind. And then I did a couple internships. I graduated college in '98, and there was a little advertisement in the Journal, and I still have it. It was maybe 2 inches long that just basically said sports writer wanted, apply here. And I did, and I got the job, and that started me on the path. How
about that? So you've pretty much you stuck with it for a while. Since undergrad, and that's to set your career going. And after the Suburban Journals, what was the progression from that point on?
Well, there was some frustration at the Journal. Even though I love the job, I love the guys I worked with. Sure. I tried to get onto bigger papers in different places, and if I'm being honest, I couldn't get anybody to answer. I got one paper to answer, and it was in Anaconda, Montana.
I've never even heard of that.
Well, I don't think anyone has. What made me laugh was the Anaconda High School mascot was the Copperhead. So they were the Anaconda Copperheads. And I thought, well, that's odd. Yeah. So I talked to the guy, and actually, he said, we want to hire you. let's make this happen. And it kind of hit me that I would be moving to Montana where it snows a ton in October, and I had this little car that wasn't going to handle the snow. And I kind of thought, I had a second thought, and I was like, man, maybe that's not the greatest thing for me to do right now. So I passed on that. And, again, if I'm being honest, even though I loved the job and I wanted to go somewhere else, I really loved covering the Rascals, the Frontier League baseball team, because I would go on the road with them. So at least 3 years, I said to myself, okay, one more summer of baseball, and then I'm going to do something about it. And that happened, like I said, at least 3 times. Wound up being at the Journal for 5 years, couldn't get anything else, so I decided to go to grad school. And I went to Mizzou, to the J school. And I don't know if this is the greatest way to approach it, but I didn't go to J school at Mizzou to get a degree. I went there to get a job.
Yeah.
Right. I went there to make contacts. And so a year and a half into the program, a job opened up at Sporting News for an assistant editor, basically lowest editor position that they had. And one of the students, I was a graduate teaching assistant at the Missourian, basically the assistant sports editor for the Missourian. And one of my former students had been an intern at Sporting News and gotten hired, and they needed somebody quick. And Sean Reed was his name, and Sean was like, hey, I know a guy. So they were like, bring him in, and I interviewed and got that job and just started at that lowest level and said, I will do anything that you ask me to do. And things just kind of moved on from there.
Wow. So
yeah,
that's interesting to me because journalism since the 90s has changed so much. TV, radio, print, you name it. They've all changed in different ways with, the popularity, obviously, of the internet and online and how that sort of shaped how we consume content and news. But the Sporting News itself has undergone so many of those changes as well. I mean, what was one of the mainstays here just locally, like it was a St. Louis and national publication, and now being an online sort of entity, has that sort of how has that changed how you have worked there for so long?
I have done everything at Sporting News in about every capacity. I mean, when I was hired, one of my first jobs on the magazine was back reading, basically fact checking and whatnot, the NASCAR pages. And I knew nothing about NASCAR, nothing. And I would so I had to learn NASCAR, and our NASCAR writer, Lee Spencer, at the time, she was as plugged in as anyone. So she would have these little nuggets, and I'm trying to search the internet to fact check them. And I'm just like, I have no idea because she's the one reporting these things,
sure.
Legit first breaking news reporting. So a lot of times we just have to go back to her and say, okay, well, we trust you on this because she had earned that trust, and, it was always right. But so I did that. I did college football, back reads. I remember one time Matt Hayes, who was a phenomenal writer, who is doing stuff at Bleacher Report now, he wrote something about a JUCO transfer, I think to Tennessee, who had showed that he was serious because he had cut his hair over the summer, and that was his physical manifestation of his transformation. So I called his JUCO coach. I asked, hey, did he really cut his hair this summer, and kind of stuff like that. But
yeah.
It's just this random thing, and I haven't thought about that in a long, long time, which just makes me laugh now. But it was just this learning on the job of the importance of being accurate, the importance of having people double check your work. I know I'm still, as a writer now, I'm very thankful when somebody says, hey, I don't think this is right. Let's figure it out. Because it's good to have that second set of eyes at least on it. And I think that gets lost a lot in today's journalism because it's let's get it out as quick as possible. We'll deal with the ramifications later. But having that background in the importance of things being accurate in the first several years at Sporting News, that really benefits me still to this day.
You mentioned the on the job part of it, and things like checking and make sure you do be accurate first before having everything locked in. How much of that you attribute to things you learned in college or at Mizzou versus it really truly being on the job? Like, are there parts of it that man, this is not an experience I expected based on what I learned in college. I'm okay. I didn't know that's how it's going to be. You attribute some of that to really truly on the job experience?
Well, I think a lot of the early time at Sporting News was because growing up in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area, I had a subscription to the Sporting News when I was a kid. I had for many years. Growing up, I read it. I read the Sporting News and I read the Post-Dispatch, and those were the two things that I really voraciously consumed. And so to have the job at Sporting News and to see my name in the masthead, and to know that even though the articles that I back read and fact checked didn't have my name on it, there was that responsibility. There was that weight to uphold the standards that had been in a magazine that had existed since 1886.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of gravity to that. So that, as much as anything, put that weight in my mind on being correct and living up to those standards. And I think it's one thing to read. And another thing I loved to do as a kid in the newspaper or magazines or whatever, I loved to find errors because that made me feel good. And I don't know why it did, but I love to find little mistakes. And then conversely, when I got to Sporting News and I realized that there were actually people who were responsible for those mistakes that I loved finding as a kid, I never wanted to be the cause of those mistakes. So I think that's just, that's an odd way maybe to answer your question.
Yeah.
But the on-the-job part of it put that weight and that gravity on the importance of the fact-checking and being accurate and these types of things that you don't really get when you're not responsible for it, when you're just talking about it. But when you're legitimately responsible for these mistakes and avoiding mistakes, I think that was kind of the thing that really hit me in those first couple of years, at the suburban journals, but especially at Sporting News.
When you see what's happening with journalism, with things like newspapers, how they're sort of the way the trends are going, and online, and how some of the publications are, closing up shop or doing different things or pivoting to video, whatever it is. Do you ever get a little nervous about what it is? You just sort of, I'm in a good place. If I do quality work, I'll be all right. How has that sort of been to manage from a professional standpoint?
Well, I mean, it is slightly terrifying at times. I'm not going to lie. I know, I've been lucky enough to be at Sporting News. I got hired at Sporting News in October of 2005. So I've been there a long time now. And I think a lot of it was because my first idea when I got there at Sporting News was I was going to do anything anyone asked. Anytime there was anything that was put up, I volunteered. I said, I'll do that even if I had no idea what I was doing. So I always tried to be the most versatile person in the room. And I think that helped through a lot of years, even though I say that there are a lot of great journalists that I knew at the time working with Sporting News that were laid off. And it had nothing to do with their abilities, their skill levels. We've been sold, I think, 3 or 4 times just since I was at Sporting News. We're owned now by DAZN, which does which, to be honest with you, the DAZN has the company on as firm a footing as it has been in the almost 15 years that I've been there. And I feel as good about the company's future as I have at any point, which is nice. There's no doubt about that. But it's still always constantly just an effort. You do what you can, and you make yourself valuable, and you put yourself in a position that when layoffs are going to come, they say, okay, well, this is a person that we don't want to do without. Yeah. And sometimes that has been why I've stayed on. And sometimes, quite honestly, because I made less money than someone who'd been there for 10 years longer than I had. and they really just looked at the numbers and
sure,
made the decisions that way. So, even though that wasn't right, I wasn't a better journalist than the people maybe that lost their jobs. But, sometimes it's a bottom line. It's a bottom line. Too often it's a bottom line world, and that's how decisions get made.
Yeah. A business. That's some decisions get made based on that. So that's one of the realities. So I don't know if you remember the first time we met, actually, I was working at the Missouri Valley Conference.
Yep.
We were hosting, I can't remember if it was I think it was 2016. We're hosting NCAA tournament in St. Louis. I'm almost certain it was the year because Northern Iowa had a game where they came back and wanted a half court shot, and then they had a game where they had a meltdown. I remember watching that game in the media room where we were doing post game quotes and all that jazz. You've covered college basketball. That's my way of bringing up. You've covered college basketball, not just baseball. Yep. You talked about the NASCAR, so you've sort of been able to sort of see a bunch of different things. Is there any one sporting event or something you've covered that stands out in your career now that is something that's like, wow, that was pretty cool, or that was quite an event to cover?
Man, that's a loaded question.
So that's a loaded. I know.
that is an area I have been incredibly lucky and blessed in my career. I mean, I was sitting courtside when UMBC beat Virginia.
Oh, okay. That's awesome.
Yes, I was there in Cleveland in the Cubs locker room after they ended the 108-year drought. I watched Bill Murray pour champagne all over Theo Epstein. I saw Murray standing there talking to Ryan Sandberg outside the clubhouse, and Ryan Sandberg just looking completely starstruck, and I snapped a picture of that. It's one of my favorite pictures of all time. I've seen a lot of things. As far as the NCAA tournament, I've actually put it together. I've been kind of, let's just say this way. There's a thing called the Fagan jinx. That my friends have not long known about, and they basically fill out their NCAA tournament brackets based on where I'm going to be. Oh boy, because upsets have a way of happening, right? So I was there for the 16 seed Virginia to lose. I've seen 2 15 seeds win. There've only been 6 of them in history, and and I've seen 2 of them.
We might be breaking some news here.
When Lehigh beat Duke, and when Middle Tennessee beat Michigan State. So I've seen a lot of these things. And it's kind of crazy how many double-digit seed teams I've seen win their first games. I was there when Southern almost beat Gonzaga when they had Kelly Olynyk. Yeah. And the game was tied with 2 minutes left, 16 over versus a 1. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of crazy things. I've been there to see. I was there when the first World Series I covered, clinching game, was the Red Sox beating the Rockies in 2007. So I've seen a lot of stuff, and I've thought about trying to rank all of these things, but to be quite honest with you, I haven't done it yet because it feels impossible every time I sit down to try to do any of that stuff.
It'd make for one heck of a book, though.
It would, man. I should publish the Fagan jinx and memoir, something like that. Yeah.
Note to self: before March gets here, find out if Ryan will be assigned.
Well, I think it's actually the first round is in St. Louis this year.
There is a
first round, so
yes, there is a second round here in St.
Yeah,
Louis.
so I'm sure I will be there. So yeah, mark your brackets accordingly.
Nice. So one of the things I mentioned at the outset before we got started, you have the distinct honor of being a Hall of Fame voter for Major League Baseball. Yeah. Talk about that. How does that even happen? When do you find out, wow, I'm going to be able to have some input on this the first year, and what's that process like? I'm always curious because you hear from other writers, and they'll share on Twitter. I know you published your ballot on the Sporting News article about your ballot and how you explain it. That was recently put out, I believe, on the 31st.
Yes.
Talk about just from your standpoint, the type of work that goes in, because you hear writers or other people that say, I'm doing this because this guy finally deserves it, or, the steroid era. People take different things into consideration. For you, when you fill out a Hall of Fame ballot on any given year, how much work and detail goes into it for you?
There's a lot. I'm not going to lie. And we'll start here with how I got the vote. If you're a member of the Baseball Writers Association for 10 years, you get a Hall of Fame vote, right? And when I started at Sporting News, they gave me a BBWAA card my second year there. And they didn't even, maybe I shouldn't say this, but they didn't even tell me I was getting one. One of our guys, I think it was Bob Hilley, who was the deputy editor at the time, and one of the best journalists I've ever been around, he walked up to my desk and said, "Here you go." And I looked at it, and I was like, "Is that a BBWAA card?" And he said, "Yep." And I was just like, "You've got to be kidding me. This is the coolest thing ever." And at the time, I was writing a little bit of baseball, but not a ton. But in the years since then, I've worked my way up the ladder at Sporting News to be I've done a little bit of everything. I've covered NBA playoff games. I've covered a lot of college football in the past. I've done a lot of things, but being around baseball and being a baseball writer was always the goal. And part of that goal was, at some point, I'd love to have a Hall of Fame vote. And it's a lot. And I'm not going to lie, the first couple of years, the last couple of years, I didn't have a vote leading up to that 10-year mark. I started to worry about it a little bit because there's a lot that goes into it. And, the steroid era guys, I honestly didn't know what I was going to do, whether I was going to vote for Bonds and Clemens and the like, or whether I was going to say, no, you can't get in if you've been associated. And that kept me up nights. I'm not going to lie, because it's, again, I talk about the gravity of being accurate when you're writing things and you're saying things factually for the magazine. And really, anything we do, anything we publish. But the gravity of having a Hall of Fame ballot was very intense, and it was kind of overwhelming the first year or two. And it still feels like a great honor. But because I've had time, and I did practice ballots the last couple of years before, even though I never published them, I just kind of wanted to do it for myself to get used to what was going to happen, to the decisions I would have to make and the logic behind it. And one of the things I've tried to do every year is, a lot of people will write like, these are the 10 people I voted for, these are the 6 people I voted for, whatever. And they'll give like short little snippets. I try to give the longest ballot explanation out there. The last couple of years, the columns have been right around 6,000 words, which that's a lot, but I try to be, I think it's important. I think it's super important for something like this to be as transparent with our thought processes as possible. And if there are guys that I'm waffling on, I'll say that. I voted for Bobby Abreu this year, even though I don't know Bobby Abreu is a Cooperstown inevitability. I don't know that he's going to wind there, but here's something I have learned, and I feel very strongly about this. It's too easy on a crowded ballot for guys to fall off the ballot in their first year. And you fall off the ballot if you don't get 5% of the vote, right? Well, there are guys that belong in that conversation for longer than 1 year, but get booted off because of a crowded ballot. Ted Simmons, who was elected by the Modern Era Committee just last month in December, was 5%ed the one time he was on a BBWAA ballot because the ballot was so stacked. But he was a Hall of Famer. It's just because of the 10-vote limit that some guys get knocked off when they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So I've tried to reserve for players I feel belong in the conversation. I will vote for them, even if they don't necessarily fit the top 10 Cooperstown resumes of that year for me. So that's the reason I voted for Bobby Abreu this year. I voted for Johan Santana a couple of years ago. I voted for Scott Rowland, and I know that this year Scott Rowland in the baseball in the tracker is up around 45%. But at the time I voted for him that first year, it was a really crowded ballot, and he was down in the 6-7% range. I wanted to make sure that he stayed on because I felt there was value in a conversation about Scott Rowland and Cooperstown. And I feel like partly because I voted for him, he made that 5%, and now he's up near 50%. And that, again, that kind of validates my reasoning behind keeping people around. And that's one of the things that I've tried to do, and I will do in the future, is vote for guys who are marginal because there's at least value in keeping them in the conversation.
Yeah. It always seems like such a tough duty, because I think there'll always be the segment that will say, well, how much does this guy know about the game? Why does he vote this and that? And I don't think there's any debating. I mean, the majority of writers, you're talking about Baseball Writers Association members that typically are beat writers. These are not just any run-of-the-mill writers, just writing about baseball. Significant guys that know the game, that are around the game, that see it a lot. So, but I think the challenge is when you start, like the Ted Simmons conversation, I think is one, and people always said, this guy, finally he got in. Well, and you just summed it up. And what I was going to say, was it a matter of right guy, wrong time? As the ballot gets stacked, and the timing of it throws him off. It's always going to be one of those things to debate with Hall of Fame, just like debating NCAA tournament, bubble teams and who gets left out and in, and college football playoff, who should be in, who should be out. It's one of those great things about sports, because if we don't have those debates, then, what else is there? And just expanding the field or, doing whatever is an easy solution. But there always will be that, well, you left out this person, well, you left out that person. So,
right. And there's value in that. That's part of the fun of being a sports journalist or a baseball writer. And I did the NCAA tournament bracket projections for Sporting News I did them for a decade. This is the first year I won't have done any of them in the last, I think, 10 or 11 years, something like that. So yeah, I've heard a lot from fan bases when I leave their team out. I've heard a lot from fan bases when I don't vote for their player. I'll say this right now. Atlanta Braves fans are not very happy with me because I didn't have Andrew Jones on my ballot. But you know what? The passion that's there, the passion that's behind the anger, maybe that doesn't manifest itself in the best way on Twitter or on Facebook or on email, but the passion that these fans have, that's what I do love. And I try to remind myself that, yes, they're mad. They're saying things about me they probably shouldn't say, and they probably wouldn't say to my face, but it's because they love this sport, this player, this game so much. And, that's kind of why we are in this industry that we are, because we had that same kind of passion and love for a sport and this event and this competition. So I try to always very much temper my responses and not get into tangential conversations that are not going to be beneficial to anybody.
Good for you. There's so much of that nowadays.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It is hard. But I try to be very mindful of that.
Yeah. We could use a whole lot more of that in 2020, and just taking a step back and realizing, okay, I get it. They're angry. And on the other end, hey, we don't all need to be keyboard warriors, and we can tweet at people just like we would talk to them when we see them in person. So my last question for you, and this goes back to the state of the, industry kind of thing. The Sporting News has sort of been one of those transgenerational publications, going back to when it was in print and as an online entity. When you see places like The Athletic pop up, and people that are investing money to get these other entities off the ground and going, and writers leaving established newspapers or whatever it is, and in some cases not their choice. In some cases they were let go, and they found a lifeline with a place like The Athletic and things like that. What are your thoughts on how those business models, and if they are sustainable? Like, The Athletic, I think, it seems to be working.
Right.
They have a different sort of strategy there with the subscriptions and not heavy with the advertising versus places like our local newspaper here, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and there is a paywall on the website, and they really want people to subscribe still to the paper and subscribe online. They've got different tiers, and you get this kind of writing for this and certain things behind the paywall. All those kind of things there. Just your thoughts on that, because it seems like, I feel, if we're not careful, that there could just sort of be this thing of what happens when it goes away, because we have to have information. I'm not just talking sports in this case. We really need journalism, and people that are saying, "Oh, I click on it and read it, but I can't," or too many ads. I don't sometimes think that people understand that it is a business and it is a career for people like yourself. And, it's, I get it. It's not, the business down the street that is offering a service, but that's what you guys are doing. It's a service. You're reporting for us. I'm going long-winded here. I'm trying to, figure out the perfect way of asking this question, but I just feel like some people just don't recognize, because in the old days, you could just click on it and read it, or the newspaper was a quarter or 25 cents. And now when you say, subscribe to get it, people don't seem as willing to do it. Now the Sport News has got a different setup there, but just the state of journalism as a whole, I don't know if most people are really sort of adopting to what it's becoming, I guess.
Right. Well, my first thought is something you mentioned about journalism, the importance. Journalism is so important. It was important in the 1800s. It was important in the early 1900s. It's as important now as it ever has been, in an era where companies and governments and whatever, they're putting out their own biased view of things. They're putting their spin on it. It's so important to have independent journalists verifying what they've said. It's important to have independent journalists doing research and digging to expose different things. And again, this is not so much sports journalism,
right?
Just journalism, news journalism. It's so important. It's as important, maybe more important than ever. My hope, to tie it back to sports, my hope is that the Athletic succeeds, thrives, becomes a stalwart, even more so than it has been. Because on one hand, I know a lot of great journalists that are there, that are friends of mine, that they love the experience, and they said it's been great. And I love what the Athletic does, right? The content that they produce, the stories they produce, the way they produce them is great. The writers, the editors, they've done a phenomenal job. So I want them to keep their jobs. The other part of it, to me, when it comes to the Athletic, is I'm hoping that sites like the Athletic and other places, maybe outside the sports journalism, help change the mindset of the public. And they understand that to get the quality, there has to be some sort of support system. For the Athletic, it's subscriptions, right? You pay the subscription, and sometimes you can get the 50% off. They just had a lot of those. Mm-hmm. Whatever you pay for it, the fact is that you're paying for it, and you recognize the value that you as the consumer are getting for the information and the stories that they're telling. And so the problem with what happened with the internet when it first came to newspapers and whatnot is that everything was free. So that's what people expected. They expected it to be free. And because it was free for so long, and because attempts to monetize it were almost always clunky, were never easy, they made it more complicated. People just said, okay, well, there are enough free things out there that we're not going to pay for it. But I'm hoping, and maybe this is a pipe dream, but I'm hoping that the Athletic is part of the tide, part of the thing that turns that tide, that people understand, yes, we need these things out there, and it's worth supporting them with $20 a year, $40 a year, whatever. I don't know how that works exactly. I don't know what the tipping point is. Like, how much is too much? I know now, even with different publications, I subscribe to several different sites online, but it's hard to subscribe to the Washington Post and the LA Times and the New York Times and all of these different places,
right,
because then you feel like you're spending $100 a month, $200 a month, and I don't have $200 a month. So I don't know what that, like I said, that tipping point is, but I'm hoping that places like The Athletic just show the value in supporting good, independent journalists. And maybe at some point that's a small part of what turns the tide and the country, and we all realize the value that the newspapers and magazines provide. So that's my hope. And again, that's a long-winded explanation to answer to whatever your question as it was, but that's kind of what kept coming into my mind as you were talking.
Yeah, no. You summed it up perfectly, because as you were going there, I was like, I guess the parallel to me is the way television has changed. Like, talk about people cord cutting, and Netflix and Hulu, and it's another way we get content. Instead of waiting for a TV show a week, every Thursday night and to watch the next episode, people just want to watch all 10 and in one day. It's a different way of getting content, and it's a subscription there. Hey, it's a subscription here. So, no, I feel the same. I subscribe to a couple different ones myself. So, again, the ones I feel passionate about and they've got something interesting I want to read. Hey, that's it. Right. And I get it. You can't subscribe to them all. I feel the same way. You find the ones that are for you, and maybe you can rotate them on and off. So, I hope I'm along the same lines of what you said, that, the mindset could get changed, because, I understand. I think I sort of got it more after I left the Missouri Valley Conference, because I had developed a relationship with all the beat writers and what they did. Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, they don't have any, ill will towards any coaches or administrators. They're just trying to report. And I get it. Their means of reporting might be different and how they handle it. But now I look at it as an outsider, because I don't work there anymore. And I'm like, okay, these guys are just trying to give me the viewpoint of what's going on. I can still form my own opinion, but they're inside, they can ask questions. And that's where I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. So it took something for me to happen. And that was the aha for me of journalism. But again, as someone that is a terrible writer, I'm a visual graphic design techie person's here. So I appreciate the effort.
That's a huge part of the journalism era now that maybe wasn't 50 years ago. But those kind of skills are ones that, if I was looking back, I would have garnered those skills more than I have. Really? Put it that way. Oh, yes, for sure. Because I think the visual aspect of storytelling is huge, and that's one of the things that we did very well with Sporting News Magazine when we still printed, that it just gets lost online so many times. Yeah. That really, it doesn't, stories don't grab you as much when they don't have that first thing to kind of draw you in. The visuals, the graphics or whatever. So, it's out there. It certainly can be, and you can do better stuff on the web. It just doesn't always happen to that extent. Yeah, and I get that. People, visuals grab people's attention. I get it. Yeah. So, cool. Well, sir, I really appreciate your time, man. This has been insightful, and me getting to dig into your mind on a couple of different things. I've always appreciated to get a viewpoint of folks on all these different topics. So tell the folks how they can sort of follow your writing and follow you on social media to keep up with what's going on with your work. Well, mostly I'm on Twitter. It's just my name, at Ryan Fagan. It's Fagan. I have an Instagram account, but it's mostly just pictures of my little kid, my little 16-month-old girl, because she's ridiculously adorable right now. So at some point, and I will do more baseball pictures now that I've moved back to St. Louis. That's part of the whole thing. It's been down the ballpark a lot more. Awesome. So there will be a lot of that stuff as the season kicks off. But right now, it's mostly just pictures of my little girl. So, sportingnews.com, we have we try to put out as much content as we can on a regular basis there. And so those are the best ways. And, if anybody always has ideas, feel free to hit me. My DMs are open. My email's on the Twitter bio, I'm pretty sure.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Trip to spring training in your future?
It will be. Yeah, we haven't figured out which side I'm going to yet, but I'll be down there at some point.
Well, sir, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks again.
It's been good. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Derek.